It's Thursday, October 26th, 2017, though it is late at night on Thursday, October 26th, 2017. So by the time you listen to this, it might be Friday, October 27th, 2017. And hey, y'all, you spooks out there, it's 4 days away from Halloween and 5 days away from the Seattle Seahawks hosting the Houston Texans in Week 8 of the NFL season for this year. The Seattle Seahawks are 4-2. The Houston Texans 3-3. Both teams fighting for, staying in front or with pace in the tops of their division. The classic AFC NFC matchup between the Seahawks in the NFC West and the Texans in the AFC South. And just a lot of interesting things going on with both teams, but the Houston Texans losing two of their key players with J.J. Watt and Whitney Merciless on defense, but they get back Dwayne Brown. Perhaps we're there at the left tackle. We'll see what happens there. But then they have this star quarterback, and for the Houston Texans, that's a rookie. I mean, star is maybe we'll see how much of a star, but hey, it doesn't hurt, especially for him to be playing as well as he is right out of the gate of his career. Something similar that we can say about Russell Wilson, but perhaps even Russell Wilson didn't get off to as good of a start to his career as Deshaun Watson has. So we'll get into that as well. This is Seahawks Chats. I don't know if I said that yet. This is Seahawks Chats, not Seaside Chats, for those of you concerned with interviews with comedians about football. This is with Seahawks Chats. And my guest today, maybe he's not a comedian of profession, but I'm sure he's a funny guy around the office or his neighborhood, and certainly at Field Gulls. John Gilbert, a writer for fieldgulls.com. You can find him on Twitter at SalesMachineTPA. John, I've had to ask this. I haven't had to, but I've taken the liberty of asking this question before with someone, with Ben Baldwin, because his Twitter handle didn't know what Guga31BB meant. It happens from time to time. We have Twitter handles, and then we suddenly find ourselves amongst the Seahawks Twitter, perhaps without our own foreknowledge that it would be going on. So could you give any explanation to the Twitter handle at SalesMachineTPA?
I have just been in sales for most of the last 15 years or so. And a few years ago, I was joking around with a friend, and we were playing around with our LinkedIn pages. And I changed the title of my LinkedIn page to Sales Machine. That was my job title, the Sales Machine, looking for the next job. And it was crazy how many recruiters just started reaching out and started trying to, hey, well, are you interested in this? Are you interested in that? And then all of a sudden it just expanded, and that became, my nickname was Sales Machine LV for Las Vegas. And then when I moved to the Tampa area, I just changed the LV to TPA. So,
wow. It's as simple as that. You just go from. So I guess I should change my Twitter handle to Seahawks Machine or something like that.
Something like that. So
they let them know that that's not only is that what I'm familiar with, but I'm a machine at it. So
absolutely.
The mystery revealed. John, it's the first time that you've been on one of my podcasts here, whether it's Seahawks Chats, Seaside Chats, Real, and the Field Gulls. But so we're getting to know a little bit about your thoughts here on the team. People could follow also, of course, with your writing here on fieldgulls.com. A lot of cap stuff, a lot of stuff that going on with the offensive line and the team. And I'm curious, just in general, with the Seahawks this year, through 6 games this season, what's something about the Seahawks that now with this iteration of the team? What's something about the team that now, whether it's good or bad, that you didn't know at the beginning of the season? Something along the lines of, well, I thought they were this kind of team, or I thought they were good at this thing, or I thought they were bad at this thing. And now suddenly 6 games later, you realize, oh, I'm surprised. I didn't know that was going to be true of this team. What is one of those things?
The biggest thing is simply just how great the defense has been through the first 6 weeks of the season. I mean, they've been phenomenal, off the charts, fantastic. And I mean, they're always good. They're always great, always at the top of the league in terms of scoring defense. But with rookies coming in and, with losing Deshaun Shedd at the cornerback position opposite of Richard Sherman, and having to figure out, okay, well, we've got to fill this spot at the Sam that we haven't for the last couple of years. We haven't gotten the pressure up the middle that we had in 2013. What is going to absolutely, is this defense going to be what it's been in the past? And it's turning out that it's something that's possibly at an even a different level than it has been, because you've got Griffin stepping in and playing well. You've got Coleman stepping up and playing phenomenal. You've got the line, I mean, between Sheldon and Naz, and I mean, just everything seems to be going right for this defense. And I mean, obviously, it's a Pete Carroll team. We're excited for the defense when the season starts. But this, I mean, to be where they are 6 games in and see how dominant this defense is right now with the injuries that they've already taken. I mean, if you told us week 1 that, hey, your starting right cornerback is going to go down with an injury, and your defensive end, Cliff Averill, he's going to go down with an injury, you wouldn't expect them to be number 1 in the league in scoring defense, and yet here they are. And it's just absolutely surprising to me, but in a good way. So,
yeah, it should be interesting to see what the defense does against the Houston Texans. Certainly, much has been made recently that at least that I've seen today in terms of how the Texans since week 3, you know, are the number 1 in the NFL in scoring offense per game. Deshaun Watson, of course, took over in week 2. I mean, that's when he became the starter in that week against the Bengals. They scored just 13 points, but then they scored 33 against the Patriots, 57 against the Titans, 34 against the Chiefs, and 33 against the Browns. So make what you will of those defenses, and I wouldn't make a ton out of them. But that being said, you know, they have been able to get offense going with Deshaun Watson, who has 15 touchdowns over 6 games, 5 starts. And certainly they've figured out how to get it done despite the fact that they really, you know, have just one receiver to speak of with DeAndre Hopkins. Just has come on and, you know, been able to play these last 3 games. And though he has 5 touchdowns, only 8 total catches. So it's going to be interesting to see what the defense does for the Seahawks, because the Seahawks, conversely, you know, they give up 17 to the Packers, 9 to the 49ers, 18 to the Colts, 10 to the Rams, and 7 to the Giants. And their one black mark on their record being the 33 points they gave up to the Tennessee Titans in Tennessee. So what problems do you see the Seahawks having on defense with the Houston Texans offense, given that they are that they have been able to put up points, albeit against defenses that I don't think can really compare? Because, you know, with those turnovers, that's the other thing, is that Seahawks, they only forced 2 turnovers in their first 3 games. They've forced 8 in their last 3 games, all wins. The Texans had 4 turnovers against the Jaguars in week 1 when Tom Savage was the quarterback to open up that game. But the Jaguars have a great defense like the Seahawks do. So there's a potential possibility there that the Seahawks will be able to do something similar and slow down the offense. So what are your concerns, or what concerns maybe do you not have?
I mean, it's the same concerns you go up against anytime you're going up against a young quarterback. You know, as you mentioned, I mean, Watson's been absolutely phenomenal. The team has put up points left and right since he took over, and it is very reminiscent of when Russell Wilson was a rookie, you know, at the second half of 20 up the playbook for him. Well, with Watson coming in and the playbook for him, they kind of added a lot into their repertoire that wasn't there when they had Savage at quarterback. It wasn't there when they had Osweiler. So my biggest concern is simply, what else is going to be coming in? What new things are they going to be doing? Because it's a different offense than they've been running. And so it's simply the defense doesn't have the film, and they don't have the depth of knowledge about what they're going to be facing. So as much as fans might hate, you know, the halftime adjustments and the slow starts, I mean, it really is, I think, in this game going to be, okay, contain them in the first half, figure out what they're doing, figure out how they're attacking the Hawk defense, and then in the second half, go from containing to controlling, commanding, and domineering on that defense, so that they're actually stepping forward, taking control of the game, as opposed to just reacting. You understand? So that's my biggest concern.
Yeah, the Seahawks defense, you know, the biggest advantages that I see here, you know, is just the fact that with Richard Sherman, if he can be the guy that removes DeAndre Hopkins from the offense for the Houston Texans, then what then can we look at to see what's left for Houston? And you see 14 targets in 3 games for Will Fuller. Like I said, he's caught 8 passes in those 3 games. And if you can keep him out of the end zone, that's where Shaquille Griffin, you know, could maybe match up pretty well, or you know, having it wouldn't be as big of a assignment there. And then after that, it's like 19 targets for Bruce Ellington. I don't even know if he's still on the team or active. 24 for tight end Ryan Griffin, 14 for tight end Steven Anderson, 10 for Braxton Miller. I don't even know which of these players necessarily would be or could be playing, but they don't have any options outside after DeAndre Hopkins. So if it's isolated to the run game, then you've got Lamar Miller and Donta Foreman, and that's interesting. But as far as the Seahawks, when you flip it around, and we know that the offensive line, that Justin Britt has an ankle issue now, that Luke Jokel's not going to be playing, that there are some things there with an already bad offensive line that's going to be changed up. At least the Texans don't have Watt and Merciless as part of their pass rush this week. And, unfortunate for their injuries, it's still probably fortunate for Russell Wilson to not have to go up against that. How concerned are you right now with the matchups for the Seahawks on offense? And when we flip that around, do you think that the Seahawks can put up points against the defense of Houston, knowing that they are shuffling some things around on the offensive line potentially?
I mean, it's always a challenge when you've got a young offensive line. Seattle's, they're bringing into this game the line that they're going to be starting. It's going to be one of the youngest in the league, one of the most inexperienced. And, if Houston absolutely has the playmakers on defense, I mean, Clowney coming off the edge could be, problems for either Odiombo or Fetty out there. And, yeah, the line's going to have its challenges. But as we've seen, they have slowly improved. They are gaining the experience. They are gaining the knowledge and the understanding of how to play. And even though, Jokel's not going to be there, they've got the platoon there at left guard, with Blow and with Ethan, where they can, build on that and gain that. And both those guys, they've shown that they have strengths that they can play to, and they've shown that they do have weaknesses. And so it's just a matter for the line of understanding what they need to do, understanding how they do it, and just relaxing and doing it to the best that they can. No, they're not a line of all pros at this point. 5 years from now, that might be something different to talk about. But right now, they simply have to do what they can do to allow the offense to operate, allow Russell to do his thing. Because Russell, I don't think there's anybody in the league who's better at dealing with a line that's an absolute disaster than Russell, because he's been through a 2-year training course on how to do it, so that this year, when the line is actually giving him some time on occasion and they're actually building pockets and they're actually looking like an actual line, he's been pretty good when he's actually stood in the pocket and thrown. He's a phenomenal quarterback, and it's just a matter of everything coming together. As we saw with, as I talk about with the defense, they are much better at this point in the season than I anticipated. And yes, the line has had problems, but they're still a whole lot better than they were last year and 2 years ago, which is an improvement and a definite step in the right direction.
And the Seahawks had to make other changes to their defensive line because of injuries with Cliff Averill going on IR. They signed Dwight Freeney this week, and you wrote about Dwight Freeney as from a player standpoint and from a contract standpoint. For those of the people out there who are listening who maybe haven't checked those out, what do you see from Dwight Freeney at this stage in his career? What do you see from him as a player, and how much he can contribute to the Seahawks? And what do you see from him from a contract standpoint, and why it made sense for them to bring in Dwight Freeney?
And from a contract standpoint, it made absolute sense, simply because they were able to take advantage of the veteran minimum exception. I mean, once they got him signed, got him to agree to a contract where basically his cap hit for the rest of the year, even if he plays and is active every single game, is less than $450,000 against the team, which is nothing for someone for what he could bring to the field. And not only that, but what he can bring in the meeting rooms. I mean, if you go back and you look at the reports from when he was in Atlanta, from when he was in Arizona, when he would take the younger guys aside and he would take them and he would teach them what to do, not just that patented spin move, not just the how to get to the quarterback. He would teach them when to use moves, when to use it, when not to use it, how to set it up through the course of the game. We saw against the Rams that Frank Clark, he said that he set Andrew Whitworth up for that strip sack at the end of the game, that everything he'd been doing throughout the course of the game before that was setting Whitworth up for the move that he blew around him and got to Goff. Well, that's the kind of thing that Freeney's going to bring to that line. room, and he's going to help. They've got the talent in there, obviously, with Bennett and Clark, but you've got a couple of other guys in there as well that are some interesting talents. You've got Jordan in there, who's coming off of NFI in a couple of weeks, and you might be able to bring him up. You've got Marcus Smith that they brought in, who was a bust out of Philly as a first-round pick. And those are guys who have the athletic ability and the traits and the talents to get drafted early, but simply have them put it together. So to bring them into a situation where they're working with a Bennett and they're working with a Clark, but they're also working with a guy who's been doing it for a decade and a half, that's the kind of thing that even if he, we might only see 10 or 15 snaps a game from him. He might come in when it's 3rd and 15 and do his patented spin move and go in and try and get the quarterback and try and help us not give up those 3rd and 20s. Not allow the 3rd and long to convert like it seems like they have been so often in the past. But just to get in there and teach the guys who might be there for the next 5 or 10 years doing the same thing. And that's, the contributions he's going to bring for the price tag that he carries, it's an absolute no-brainer.
Yeah, and I'm curious too because of your looking at your knowledge on the contracts and the salary cap and all that kind of stuff, considerations moving forward. We know that the Seahawks, per overthecap.com, before Dwight Freeney signing, apparently had maybe about $1.8 million in cap room for this season right now. And how does that stuff work in terms of carrying over? What do you know about like the situation with how much room the Seahawks would have for next year based on how much they spent this year or last year? Like, how does all of that stuff work as far as you know?
Well, whatever they don't use this year will roll over towards next year. But it's whatever that amount is going to be, it's going to be small. But the issue that the team is facing right now is that they've brought in Freeney. That leaves them with probably about $1.3 million in cap space, which is not a lot. But we're getting to the point of the season where the only additions they're really going to be making, it would be great to bring in, a Brandon Albert or someone, but odds of getting him in that $1.3 million are slim. Odds are the only thing they're going to need that cap space for between now and the end of the year is injury replacements. And those injury replacements, they're going to be minimum salary guys typically. They're going to be guys who are coming in at not a lot of money. Now, at the end of the year, they could do a couple of things. We saw that Michael Bennett extension at the end of the season last year. We saw a couple of years ago with KJ Wright and Cliff Averill, they extended him at the end of the year because for cap purposes, they can put a part of that signing bonus proration on the current year, and then it's already in the past. Well, they don't have a ton of cap space this year. The thing that I'm really going to be watching between now and Tuesday is whether or not they do step up and take a trade or make a trade of Jeremy Lane. And the reason that could be big is not only would it free up the remainder, roughly half of what his salary is this year. The thing at the cornerback position is that with Deshaun Shedd on the physically unable to perform list, he's already being paid. So his money is already counting against the cap. So if they do trade Lane and bring Shedd back at some point, then they don't have to have an injury replacement. They don't have to pay extra to fill that roster spot because Shedd's already being paid. He's already having that money counted towards the cap. He simply slides in, and whatever they free up off of by trading Lane frees up on the cap. But outside of that, for the rest of the season, there's really minimal space available, and it's probably just going to be, if someone goes on IR, who's going to come in and take that roster spot.
So if you were looking at some of the things that we've seen from this year with the Seahawks and knowing that, next year they're projected to have about $31 million in cap room if they don't make any other moves, and they can still make moves with Cliff Averill, who's going to count $8 million against the cap. So if he leaves or if he's released, that would then give them over $38 million in cap room. And I think we can almost expect maybe that there's going to be a change there as he gets older and maybe doesn't have the ability to come back. We'll see. If they make a change with Jeremy Lane, then that can get them over $43 million in cap room if they decide to release him or trade him. And for the most part, that would seem to be their biggest potential changes coming up. So there is flexibility there, but then they have their own free agents. So if I go through some of these free agents, you just can quickly tell me if you like the idea of bringing them back, and or what you think a potential contract situation could look like, for one of these guys. I'm starting with the biggest name that we know of that didn't get extended out of the big three between him, Justin Britt, and Cam Chancellor, which is Jimmy Graham. Do you see them having any chance of moving forward with Jimmy Graham based on his production this year and his price tag of being the top paid tight end in the NFL?
I mean, Graham is a phenomenal weapon, and I would absolutely love to have him back, but it's all going to come back to what that number is going to be. How much does he want? And, if he agrees to a very team-friendly contract, then absolutely. But honestly, I feel the market for him will be north of $10 million. And I think this is a team that doesn't want to spend, that much money on a tight end who's on the wrong side of 30 with a, history of a serious knee injury. And, Graham will probably go, I feel Graham will probably go and make his money somewhere else.
Thomas Rawls.
That's a tough one. I think what they will do is non-tender Rawls or original round tender Rawls as a restricted free agent, and then let him shop the market. And if he comes back and they've got if it's a deal worth matching, great. And if not, move along.
Paul Richardson.
Richardson is a talent I think they would absolutely love to keep. He's shown what he can do this season. He stayed healthy through the first 6 weeks, which I'll be the first to admit I'm surprised about. But I think he's the price tag for a receiver with his kind of speed and the hands that he has shown. I think he's going to price himself out of the Seahawks market.
Blair Walsh.
I think they'll extend him either last weekend of the season like they did with Bennett, or as soon as the season is over. I expect him to be back.
Luke Jokel.
With Jokel, I think it's going to depend on how the rest of the other guards that are in the competition play 4 weeks or so that he is out. I think if we see competent guard play from the others on the roster between now and, say, Thanksgiving, I think he's gone. If there's some iffiness and if there's some shakiness and he's willing to take a decent deal, I'd have no problem bringing him back, and I think the team would love to have him back. But we'll just wait and see on that.
They've also got some other lower key 1 year deals that they signed of their own players, like Luke Wilson.
Wilson's a tough one. I mean, he got passed in snaps. He was in terms of snaps played this past weekend, he was number 3 out of the 3 tight ends on the roster. It doesn't tend to indicate to me that they're really trying to build him up to keep him around long term. I mean, I know they tried to extend him last year. They obviously brought him back on a 1 year deal this year. But I expect him to shop the market again. And if they can, I don't think there'll be anything before free it comes back. It will be something where it's done once we're already into free agency in March.
Yeah, and some of these other guys, Deshaun Shedd, it's hard to say. We'll see what happens when he comes back.
One thing that is interesting to watch with Shedd, it's one of those fine points of the CBA, is if for some reason Shedd isn't healthy by the time Thanksgiving gets here and he's not on the active roster for those last 6 games of the season, and they end up sliding him over to IR, because he's on a 1 year contract and you will have spent the entire year on a physically unable to perform list, he will actually be his contract will toll, which means that next year he will be back on the Seahawks for the exact same contractual terms that he's on the team this year.
Oh, that's interesting for sure. I think probably prefer that he comes back, but it is an option. Potentially, I mean, it's an option if it becomes to that point.
No, absolutely. If he's physically able, please, you bring him back. But there's no need to rush him back from a knee injury. I know he had the serious knee injury, blew out the ACL there in the 3rd quarter against the Falcons, and then he had some kind of follow-up procedure. They haven't said exactly what, at least that I have seen, back in late July or August. So hopefully he comes back and contributes down the stretch. But if for some reason he's not able to physically, then he is a name that could be right back into the mix again next year.
What are your thoughts so far on the 1-year deal for Bradley McDougald? Because a lot was made of it at the time, and then throughout the offseason of how we'd have this defense, it's new, and McDougald is he's going to be all over the field and yada yada yada. We just haven't seen or heard from him. So what were your thoughts so far on McDougald?
Look, I went to the University of Kansas just like Bradley McDougald did. I absolutely loved him when he was in school there. I would love to have him back just to have a Jayhawk on the roster. However, just like you said, they really haven't deployed him. They really haven't used him. I think I saw somewhere this week that he actually saw more snaps this past week against the Giants than he had the entire rest of the season combined. And maybe that was simply matchups. Maybe it was something else. But I think with him, it'll definitely depend on how he plays down the stretch. And how much usage they get out of him, what his market turns out to be.
And have you gotten any sense from some of these other guys that, we've come in from here with Michael Wilhoit and Terrence Garvin at linebacker, special teams?
The team loves their special teamers. They absolutely, I've been impressed with Garvin watching him. Wilhoit, I haven't watched as much individually, but Pete, absolutely, he puts such an emphasis on special teams. That Garvin and Wilhoit, with the number of snaps that they're getting and seeing, that they'll be guys, like the Mike Morgan. They're not going to rush out to sign them, but they'll absolutely stay in the mix. They'll stay in communication with them. And if they're available, bring them back.
So with knowing, sort of, and I would be too on the, spur of the moment to ask you which free agents of 2018 the Seahawks could look at, because I didn't ask you to prepare or anything like that. But knowing what you know about perhaps offensive line allocation and the amount of money the Seahawks spend on offensive line versus other positions, and how key it is for them to keep their own players, and knowing that they'll have about $43 million in cap room, and that they maybe want to try and re-sign. They're definitely going to try and re-sign a few of these guys, but it seems like they could still have some spending money. Do you see them going out of their way? Because we saw in this past offseason when free agency came around, I think a lot of offensive linemen got pretty bad contracts for those teams, and the teams have to overpay for mediocre offensive line play because there's so few free agents that are allowed to hit the market. And getting one in the draft, you basically have to be drafting in the top 10, top 15 to get a really upper level left tackle or right tackle. And in some cases, even a all-pro guard or Pro Bowl guard, doesn't necessarily going to, if the Seahawks are successful this year and are drafting in the late 20s again, the idea of them drafting an offensive lineman that's going to help is going to be low. And the idea, at least right away, and the idea of them getting one in free agency, they might be overpaying. So, what were your thoughts there in terms of should they or could they overpay for a lineman next year?
They absolutely could, but I think they focus so much on defense. They've always paid more for the defense. And Frank Clark is extension eligible after this season. Sheldon Richardson has been a monster since he got to the team, just 7 weeks ago. And I strongly believe that their first priority will be to make sure that at least one of those two, if not both of them, are under contract long term, and then they'll look at the offensive line. I think we saw them go after Joe, and we saw them go hard after Lang, but come up just short, and we saw them bring in Ode there at the right guard. But it's just a matter of the bang for the buck is what John Schneider looks for, and that's just not there in the free agent market for offensive linemen. You're talking guys who are playing guard have cap hits similar to what Richard Sherman has, or higher than Earl Thomas has. And I don't think there's anyone who thinks that those players are a bigger impact player than Richard Sherman or Earl Thomas. Linemen are great, but they've spent the last 2 seasons, building this line up internally. They've put it together with youthful guys that they've thrown in-house. Yeah, they've brought in a couple guys that thrown people into the mix just to, speed things along. But I really think we're going to see, I think the core of the line that we have right now is going to be the core of the line. There's going to be 3 or 4 of those 10 linemen who are on the roster who 4 or 5 years from now are still on the roster, still the core of the line, because I truly believe they're trying to build the line where they've got a core group of guys, 3 or 4 of them, who play together, will have been together for several years at a time, will know each other, trust each other, understand what's going on, and can have the communication between one another, just like Doug and Russ, or like Hurst and Russ had before Jermaine left. You know, where they're growing them up together. They're putting all these seeds in the pot. They're putting some water on it. And yeah, it's frustrating at times to have to go through those growing pains, especially for those lower round draft picks. You know, you talk about you want to get an impact player, a Taylor Lewan, or someone who goes to the Pro Bowl, or a Jack Conklin who's all pro as a rookie. Yeah, they're not drafting high enough to get those guys, and they hopefully won't be drafting high enough to get those guys anytime soon. So you've got to deal with the guy growing up, like like Reese out there at left tackle. God bless him, he's doing a great job for being a third round pick with his first serious extended playing time. I mean, we're seeing some fantastic improvement from week 1 to week 7 or whatever. We're heading into week 8 now. But it's just a matter of dealing with those growing pains and getting through that, and some are going to work out and some aren't,
Yeah. And
they've made, when things haven't worked out, they've made the changes that they needed to make. They sacked Lewinsky, and now he's platooning when they brought him back. And it's, we're seeing that shuffling. We're seeing them figuring out which pieces that work. And I think by the end of the season, we'll have a good idea of which 3 or 4 maybe, pieces will be key pieces going forward.
Yeah. And in terms of outside of the Seahawks, obviously right now they're 4-2. They're chasing up the Rams in the NFC West at 5-2. They got the head-to-head win in LA, which was the toughest probably task for them within the division this year. And coming up, we've talked about the Texans. They've got the Redskins at home. They go to Arizona where things have fallen apart. At home against Atlanta, where that team is having some pretty serious issues with their own offensive problems and, not having the same level of defense the Seahawks have. And then at San Francisco, who's clearly maybe the worst team in the NFC, if not the NFL. And then they've got their big Sunday night matchup against the Philadelphia Eagles. And then a tough game, surprisingly or not, at Jacksonville, 10 a.m. In week 14. And then the rematch against the Rams. And then at Dallas. I didn't mean to go through the whole schedule, but I just had to there was something interesting in week after week. So with that being said, how serious of a threat do you consider the LA Rams to be in the NFC West? And how serious of a threat do you consider the Eagles to be in the NFC as a whole?
I mean, the Eagles scared me a whole lot more before Monday night. I mean, they lost their best players on Monday night, and they're still a good team. They're still going to put up a fight. But I mean, the blast they were dealt on Monday night would be like the Hawks losing 2 of their key players. Whether that you want to say that's Britt going down and Wagner going down, or somebody, pick your star player on each side of the ball. The defense collapsed last season after Earl Thomas went down. They've lost 2 of their core on each side of the ball. They're definitely they're a good team. They're gonna compete. They're gonna play hard. They're gonna put up a fight when they, when they go to battle with the Seahawks. But I think that's gonna be at that time of year where Seattle just really starts rolling, and the injuries have already started to add up. Obviously, Seattle could suffer their own injuries. The Hawks could go down. They could lose players like they did last year. But at this point, I mean, you've got to feel pretty confident. I know you just went through the whole schedule. In looking at the schedule, that Eagles game, I mean, that's a month and a half from now. But that could realistically be the next time the Hawks play a team who's over 500 when they match up. I mean, the next 5 games are all against teams that are currently at or below 500. Mm-hmm. And, I mean, it's Eagles, Jaguars, Rams, Cowboys. That's, 4 games in a row right there at the end. That's going to set the table for the whole season. So that's going to be the determining factor. How good are they between weeks 13 and week 16? Yeah, they're all good teams. They all have bright spots. I mean, Calais Campbell is destroying people up in Jacksonville. So that's obviously frightening as all get out for the offensive line. But they've got another 6 weeks to get better. So
Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah, and it's I think the best part about the Seahawks start is that they're 4-2 instead of 2-4, which we saw a couple years ago. They get the win against the Rams. They're not 3-3. They didn't go to New York and blow it against a team that was dismantled on offense and falling apart on defense. Losing at Green Bay or at Tennessee to open the year, I don't think anybody would have really taken much issue with that, if with anything other than with hindsight. I think the Titans were expected to be a strong team, and if anything, they've been a bit inconsistent for sure. But at the end of the day, are 4-3, and the game was at home, and they did what you would want to do against the Seahawks, which is run successfully, and they have the weapons there on offense in the run game. That is going to frustrate a lot of teams because most teams haven't dedicated themselves to a run game anymore in the way that the Tennessee Titans have as a team that's number 1 in rushing touchdowns this season with 9 of those. So it's fair. And then losing at Green Bay, they didn't get blown out against Green Bay like they had in the previous couple of games where it wasn't that close, so 17-9. So there's positives to take away from there. So to get into that, and then to get into these next 5 games against, like you said, teams that could be at or below 500, some of them certainly will be. It's an opportunity for them to maybe get to the amount of wins that they need to make the playoffs. So by the time they get to the Philadelphia Eagles, even potentially, but I think it's also so good that their game against the Eagles is at home and it's on prime time right now. I'm certain there's not a lot of viable situations in when that game would be taken out of prime time, as the Eagles are, of course, 6-1. But that is such an advantage for them too, to be in that position, because I think if that game was on the road, if it was like a middle of the day type game, if it's just an innocuous game that gets lost in the schedule shuffle, that would be a much different situation. I think there's just an air of confidence for me, at least, and I think for the team as well, to play on prime time. And didn't even look at this before, but they play in prime time in 3 out of 4 weeks, between week 10, which is the Thursday at Arizona, and week 11, Monday Night Football against the Atlanta Falcons, and then week 13, that Sunday Night Football game against the Philadelphia Eagles. And then we could see if there's a flex situation later on in the year with the Rams in week 15 and the Cowboys in week 16. Should be interesting. So there's that to look forward to. So finally, I guess it's just like your thoughts almost midway through the season, and we'll see what happens with the Houston Texans. Do you just have sort of your feelings and predictions for how the Seahawks, where you're feeling right now with their win total, and how, if that'll be enough to get them a division win, a first round bye, given what we know about the rest of the NFC, the fact that Aaron Rodgers isn't going to be around, that kind of stuff? Your thoughts on their potential win total, as well as where that'll place them?
No, I mean, obviously 4-2, like you said, is far better than 2-4, where they were sitting a couple of years ago. I think they've positioned themselves fantastically. They've got the next 5 games are all winnable. Doesn't necessarily mean they will win them, but they definitely have the table set so that if they can run those 5 games and they go into, they've got those what are looking like the 4 of the toughest games that they'll play this year at the end of the season, the Eagles, Jaguars, Rams, Cowboys. Those 4 games will, if they can go into that, I mean, 9-2, 8-3, 7-4, then they're sitting pretty. Obviously, the better they can be heading into that, then the more likely that first round bye is. But I definitely feel, especially with the injuries we've seen around the league, you mentioned Rodgers, and the injuries that the Eagles have sustained. The Falcons are just, they haven't put it together for whatever reason. They're definitely one of the teams that has to be considered, not just for a first round bye, but also for home field advantage. I definitely think, the division very easily could come down to that December 17th game against the Rams. And by the time we get to just, the Christmas Eve game against the Cowboys, we're obviously going to have a huge idea, a great idea of what the playoff picture looks like. But we're also going to get to see, that's going to be a couple of tune-up games for Russell Wilson and the offense heading into the playoffs, because going up against the Cardinals and going, he's done very well against the Cardinals late in the season. Obviously, that one's at home. We've had some issues, but the offense has put points on the board against the Cardinals late in the year when they've played. And so I'm excited. They've set themselves up great. They started off, obviously, losing 2 of 3 is never the way you want to start the season, but to be 4-2 after losing 2 of the first 3, they've definitely come together, put themselves where they need to be, and now it's just coming to play on Sunday and doing what they need to do.
I'll just end the podcast with one last question, just because it's relevant to the time that we are recording this right now. The Ravens beat the Dolphins 40-0 on Thursday Night Football. The Miami Dolphins, playing without Jay Cutler and Matt Moore, goes 25 of 44, 4 yards per attempt, no touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Very ugly performance against the Baltimore Ravens, but Joe Flacco goes into the concussion protocol after he had started out pretty well. Not great, but 6.7 yards per attempt, but pretty well. Ryan Mallett that comes in and does nothing. 3 of 7 for 20 yards, a touchdown. Yeah, who cares? But Alex Collins, 18 carries for 113 yards, 6.3 yards per carry, a long of 19, leads the NFL in yards per carry, on pace for over 1,000 rushing yards. Some source perhaps of a little bit of controversy in Seattle, if you consider, this is a guy that was released, and I think at the time of his release, you could look at a situation with Chris Carson, where of course Chris Carson is the guy that you would want to keep based on everything that we had known up to that point. His injury couldn't be predicted. Eddie Lacy and Thomas Rawls not looking any good, but they had such good years before, and they were young, and they had some money attached. So not exactly, it was tough for Alex Collins to maybe be that 4th guy or 3rd guy under numerous situations. And then now in Baltimore, it's a different offensive line. They've got better players along the offensive line. It's a better offensive system. But I think Alex Collins maybe didn't get the long enough shake for people. Maybe even if he was right to release him, didn't get enough of a shake for people to say that he's necessarily a bad player in Seattle that is getting better opportunities in Baltimore, and that's why he looks better. I think he's a guy that didn't get a lot of opportunities in Seattle and didn't even look that poor. I think as a running back, you can't really judge a guy on that few amount of carries. He didn't even look that terrible all the time when he was playing for the Seahawks, in my opinion. And now he goes and he just looks pretty good. So with Alex Collins, having another good game and having a good season, what are your thoughts for anyone listening out there in terms of how good Alex Collins really is, in your opinion, and if he would have been a fit up to this point with Seattle?
I think he's a decent running back. I mean, we actually saw him second half of the Cardinals game last year. Rawls got benched in favor of Collins. He performed well in the second half of that game. He ended up with one of the better yards per carry averages at the end of the season for the team last year, 4 yards a carry, which was above the team average. It was better than Rawls and better than C-Mike. But his issue, it was fumbling. I mean, he carried the ball 31 times last year, and he fumbled twice. He's carried coming into tonight's game, he carried the ball 62 times, and he fumbled twice. It was his issue in college. He fumbled 17 times while he was at Arkansas. That he just never learned how to hold on to the ball. And Pete preaches, protect the ball, protect the ball, protect the ball. I mean, he carried the ball 62 times for Baltimore. He fumbled twice, and that's twice as many fumbles as all of the Seahawks receivers and running backs combined. I mean, Thomas Rawls' fumble this past weekend was the first fumble by any of the skill position players, not Russell. And Collins, on a quarter of the number of touches, has fumbled twice as often. I mean, you're just not going to last on a Pete Carroll team when you're giving the ball away that quickly. So I think he's a good, decent running back. I don't think he's a 6 yard per carry back like he's averaging right now. I think he'll come back to earth some. I could obviously be wrong about that, but if he can learn to hold on to the ball, he could be a threat. But if he keeps fumbling the ball, it doesn't matter how many yards per carry he's averaging, he's going to end up unemployed.
All right, this has been Seahawks Chats with Kenneth Arthur. My guest, John P. Gilbert. You can follow him on Twitter at SalesMachineTPA, because that's what he is. He's a selling machine, but he's also a machine of the Seattle Seahawks cap, offensive line. You heard a lot of great stuff here tonight on the show. You can follow us on Twitter at Field Goals. Go to fieldgoals.com. Check out a bunch of great stuff that's coming at you hard and fast right now. I feel like we got a lot of good content coming out there, guys. And what do you have if you're not made of content? So check out Field Goals. We got some new teas up there. Subscribe to the show on iTunes at Seaside Chats with Kenneth Arthurs. And we got some more stuff coming. So thanks so much for listening. And that's it. Go Hawks against the Texans. And we'll be back next week.